Alright guys, so now I'm going to tell you a story about my childhood that I've never really told anyone else before, and this is what led me to who I am today. So I was born in 1975 in Miami Beach, Florida. My parents were together at the time, but when I was about 1 year old, they got divorced. When my parents got divorced, my dad stayed in Miami and my mom, she moved to Chicago. So I ended up going with my mom to Chicago. I don't remember much about that time because I was only like 2, 3, 4 years old, but I know it was pretty cold. I mean, what the fuck do you remember when you're 3, 4 years old? So when I was about 4 years old, my mom moved from Chicago and went to New York. So I lived in New York for about 4 years with my mom. Now, I remember a little bit about New York. So when I moved to New York, my mom got a 1-bedroom apartment, and it was just me and her. We lived there in a 1-bedroom apartment, and my mom was nice enough actually to give me the bedroom. My mom used to sleep in the living room. We literally had a living room, like a little kitchen dining room area, a bathroom, and then the 1 bedroom. And I remember like when we had guests over, it was kind of weird because my mom had her bed and all her clothes and basically like makeshift closets in the living room. We definitely didn't grow up having much money. I lived in Brooklyn on Ocean Parkway, and I remember growing up and going to preschool. I don't remember so much about preschool, but I remember when I got to 1st grade, the schools I went to, and I just remember being a really bad kid. And my mom was, a single mom, and she had to raise me by herself, and she was working all the time. So I didn't get to spend a whole lot of time with her. I was at home alone a lot. And I ended up being a really bad kid in school. I used to be like the class clown. I used to make fun of people. I used to get in fights, and the teacher would always have to call my mom, and literally I would get suspended a lot and just always in trouble. I remember ever since I turned about 7 years old, I had to walk to school myself and walk home. Like, my mom had to go to work, and then she wasn't able to pick me up because she was at work, and I didn't have a whole lot of friends or family there. She was kind of by herself, so we just kind of had to do what we had to do. So what I could tell you is I remember being like 7, 8 years old, and I was a very unhappy kid. I didn't have like a happy kid lifestyle. I remember always being pissed at the world. I never grew up with my parents. I never like got to spend time with my parents. I never had like a whole lot of friends. I wasn't around family, and nothing was really going great for me in life at this point. When I was growing up with my mom in New York, I would visit my dad maybe like once a year. Maybe he'd come visit once a year, but I never really had a strong relationship with him. We talked on the phone, of course, here and there. We kind of had to do our own thing. So I remember at one point that I just kept getting in trouble at school. Like, I was get suspended, and eventually I got expelled from one school in 2nd grade, then another school in 3rd grade. So I kept having to switch schools, and my mom just couldn't handle it. My mom was at work, she couldn't handle me, and it got to a point where there were no schools in the area that would take me. So we had to make a tough decision on what was going to happen. When I was about to turn 9, we had to make a big decision, and the decision was that I had to move to my dad and go to a totally another city, a totally another school, and kind of start my life over because I was obviously, hanging around not the right kids, and I just wasn't behaving, and there was no discipline that my mom could give me that could turn me around at that point. So we were thinking maybe, or at least she was thinking maybe if I moved to my dad that something could change and my life could turn around. So when I was 9 years old, I ended up moving to my dad's house in Miami. So now I'm in Miami with my dad, and we got along pretty well in the beginning. But what happened was when I ended up moving to my dad's house, I had a lot of resentment with my mom because I felt like my mom kicked me out, didn't want me, and it was really rough. And I got so crazy, and in my head, I just felt like she really, really did me wrong. And I literally wouldn't talk to my mom. So literally from when I was 9 years old all the way till I was about 14 or 15 years old, I would not talk to my mom. So my mom would try to reach out to me, and I would hang up on her. Every single letter that she sent me, I would rip up, send back. And I was my mom's only kid. So looking back, it was pretty bad. I wish I wasn't like that. It probably broke her heart. And she didn't really do anything that bad. I just, took what happened in a bad way. I had so much animosity, and I think that's even made me worse and more of a troublemaker as I got older. Now I'm in Florida, and my dad, was dating, of course, and he actually found this girl that he was dating for a while, and they became married. And this happened like literally within a year of when I moved in with him. So when he got married, this is kind of awkward for me. Like, I didn't really know her that well, and I knew she wasn't my mom, and I didn't want her acting like my mom because I had a mom, although I was pissed at my mom and didn't ever want to talk to my mom. So it was kind of a weird situation. And I lived with my dad for probably like 2.5 years. And, eventually the same thing that was happening with my mom happened with my dad. I was very bad in school. I kept getting in trouble. The teachers would kept calling my parents or my dad and say, look, you need to pick him up. I got suspended. And I actually got expelled from a school and had to, go to another school again. So the same routine kept happening. My dad didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to handle this as well, So, it led for him disciplining me in, probably the wrong ways. And, it started me to resent him even more. So eventually I ended up not wanting to be around my dad much either. And, at this point I wouldn't talk to my mom. And at this point, I was about to be done with talking to my dad for a little while. So we didn't know, what to do. And what happened was when I was 12 years old, I ended up moving into a foster family. And I was totally away from my mom. I was totally away from my dad. Never talked to either one of them. And I moved in with a stranger that I became good friends with, really good people. And I lived with them for probably, 9-10 months. And what happened was I still wasn't behaving in school. So no matter where I went, I kept getting in trouble and nobody could handle me. So I actually went from that foster family to a second foster family, and I lived with them for a few months, and the same thing happened. They couldn't handle me, and I was just acting up. And at that point, my parents had to make a decision what to do. And what they decided was to put me in a boarding school for kids that were acting up, into drugs, and just misbehaved. Now, I never did drugs in my life, and I was never into that, but I was very, very bad as a kid, always getting in trouble. I ended up, when I was 13 years old, moving into a boarding school, and this boarding school was in Tampa, Florida. So I went from Miami to Tampa, and I lived there for a year and a half, and literally you're locked up all the time. Besides when you go to school or go to eat, you had a little bit of time to go and do that. And then of course there's therapy class. So I always had a therapy class every day. It had someone that would talk to me about how I was acting and figuring out why, and trying just to get into my brain and figure out ways to help me not be like that. One thing about this story that I haven't told anybody yet is that my parents are Jewish, and not only were they Jewish, they are Orthodox. So they did like everything you could possibly do to the highest extent of being Jewish. So when I was about 9-10 years old, I really started not liking it. And to me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So, but again, when you're grown up in a Jewish Orthodox family, that's really all you hung around. Like every single school I went to was all Jewish. Every single one of my friends were Jewish. And when you're Orthodox, you can't do anything on Saturday, Sabbath. You can only eat kosher. There's so many different things that you can and can't do. And that's all I knew. I thought like that's the way the world was. And when I finally went to like foster families, and especially this boarding school, there was nobody Jewish in this boarding school. So it opened up my eyes to what the real world was like. I saw all kinds of people and all kinds of things that I never saw. It's the first time that I was able to like quit doing anything, that had to do with Judaism and kind of just do my own thing. So as bad as all this sounds, like how I went to a foster family, to another foster family, to a boarding school, and at this point, I'm 13, 14 years old, I think it was actually a very good turning point in my life. I saw so much other stuff that I never would have seen. I wasn't sheltered as much, and it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about life. So this boarding school I was in was really to help, you turn around and to become a better person, but it's not meant to be there like long term. So I was actually there, almost a year and a half, and at that point I had to leave. So the only thing that made sense for me to move to was another foster family. So my therapist that I got really close to while I was there actually, came up and was like, what, if you need a place to go, why don't you come live with me? So I actually moved into my therapist's house when I left this boarding school, and I lived with him for about a year, and it was kind of a really cool experience. So he was like diehard Catholic. He's a Catholic, and my parents weren't even crazy about me moving in with him because he was like really Orthodox Catholic, and went to church all the time and all that stuff, and it was totally against my parents' religion. But you know what, that was who made the most sense for me to live with. So I got to live the Catholic life for a good year and a half, and seeing the differences between religions, definitely opens me up to like how I believe in religion now. And so one of the main reasons why we thought that was a good idea to move in with my therapist was because I'd have a lot of time to spend, and he'd be able to help me with my life and my thoughts and get me to behave better. And it actually worked. So, a year later, I'm doing much better in school. I'm not getting in trouble. I'm actually passing some grades. I'm not skipping every class. And it was time to move on. That was a temporary solution. So I ended up moving into another foster family. And this particular foster family didn't work out as well. I didn't get along very well with them. Probably more my fault than their fault, but it was just an awkward situation and I didn't feel comfortable there. So probably after like 4 or 5 months, I knew that we had to find another place for me to live. And at this point, I still haven't talked to my mom now in 5 years. I really didn't talk to my dad probably for the last 2 or 3 years, because at this point, I was really, feeling like I didn't want to talk to him because he put me in this boarding school. I thought it was bullshit. He couldn't handle me. He was my dad. Why couldn't he handle me? My mom couldn't handle me, my dad. So at this point, I really didn't get along with anyone in my family. I was my dad and mom's only child, so I didn't really have any brothers or sisters at the time. My dad did end up having more kids with my stepmom, but their oldest kid was 11 years younger than me, so we never even knew each other because I actually moved out of the house right when their oldest kid was born. And I literally never even met or knew any of their other kids for, many, many years, over a decade or two. So at this point, when I left my last foster family, what we decided was that the best person for me to move into is a family member, another family member. And the only person that really made sense that I was close with was my grandmother. So my grandmother lived in Atlanta. So when I was 15, that is how I ended up in Atlanta. And I've been in Atlanta pretty much ever since. So I had a bunch of cool cultural experiences that really changed throughout, when I was 12, when I moved out of my parents' house and went to boarding school. And, even when I moved from, my last foster family to Atlanta with my grandmother, there was a lot of unique differences. So when I moved with my grandmother, we got along really well and I really respected her and I wanted to do good. So I tried to do the best I could in school. I didn't want her to have any, issues with teachers calling and all other things. So I really, really tried to behave and do the best I could. Now, when I lived with her is kind of when I started, wanting to make my own money and basically having to have my own freedom. And this was an interesting part of life. So I collected sports cards my whole life when I was little, and I actually started selling them when I moved into my grandmother's house in Atlanta, and I saw that I was able to start making some money. The more money I made, the more freedom that I had to do things, and it kind of became addictive, and I started literally getting better and better at buying and selling sports cards all throughout when I was 15 years old. And this is ultimately what led me to be a millionaire by the time I was 19 years old. If you want to see more how that happened, watch this video right here. Obviously, there's a ton of lessons I learned, but let me go through the top 5 lessons I've learned from these experiences. So number 1, self-reliance and independence. I learned early on that even when I didn't have a whole lot of people around me, that I could still make it and do very well. And up until today, I still do a lot of things on my own. I still do a lot of things by myself. I don't rely on other people to do things for me, and I just make things happen, and I know how important that is. The second big lesson that I learned is the importance of freedom. When I was younger, I always had to listen to everybody. I always had someone in charge of me, whether it was my parents, whether it was a foster family, whether it was, in the boarding school, the therapist and all these different people, and I just didn't like it. I wanted to do my own thing. So what I saw was when I started to make a little bit of money and started to make some wiser decisions is that my, people that were over me let me do my own thing, and then with the money that I had, I was able to buy stuff that let me have opportunities that I wouldn't have had. So ever since I left that boarding school, I always promised to myself I was going to do whatever I had to do to have as much freedom as possible. The third important lesson that I learned was to be very resourceful. I literally didn't have hardly anything growing up, and whatever I had, I saved, and I turned into a business, and I was able to make money off things that nobody thought you could make money off of. Of course, I had to figure out how to keep myself occupied, how to keep myself out of trouble, and all these different things really played a big role in how I am today. So the fourth thing that I learned from when I was younger was, I was always a very determined kid. Sometimes I was determined to do a lot of bad things. Sometimes I was determined to do a lot of positive things. I always looked around when I was younger and I saw people that were doing a lot better than me, and I was always determined to get to their level and be able to do whatever I wanted and to live like they lived. And as I got a little bit older and I was able to make a little bit of money and do more things with my life, I really love that the progress and the determination that I had brought me that progress and kept pushing me to do better and better. So even today, when I'm pretty much set where I can do whatever I want, I still have that drive and determination to keep doing better and better, because it just makes you feel so much better about yourself. And this leads me to the fifth and most important thing that everything has taught me. What has taught me is that anyone can be successful in life. Like literally, I was a dog when I was younger. Like I wasn't supposed to get anywhere in life, and you know what? I fought that, and I was determined, and I wanted to get better, and I did whatever I had to, and now look where I'm at. Now I'm pretty much, where a lot of people come to me for help. I'm able to help people. I'm able to do all kinds of stuff. I'm able to live life the way I want. I have, an unbelievable family and an unbelievable life, and if I can do it, I promise you that anyone can do it. So guys, if you don't want to end up in a boarding school, you better like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, and make sure you watch all the videos and share it and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of them going forward.